Okay, let's get going here. This is Redgate Software, and we are moving on. What we're going to talk about today is extending DevOps practices to SQL Server databases. I mean, there's a lot more to it than simply, somebody's been assigned to DevOps or some person's gotten assigned to DevOps. It's a deep, dark topic, and we're going to go over some of the issues around it. Databases kind of bring in a unique problem set, and we really want to kind of show you some fun stuff that can help you solve these problems. Now, who am I? Oops, come on. There we go. Who am I? My name is Grant Fritchey. I work for Redgate Software. If you have questions on this topic or pretty much anything else after today, I'd be glad to try to help out. This is my information. You can get in touch with me on Twitter, with my email, or scarydba.com is my blog, and I will try to help you out if I can. I've got more than 20 years of experience in IT, tons of experience with SQL Server. Database DevOps is something I've been doing for a very long time. So I'm so excited that our company is hooked into it in such a major way. It's a passion of mine already. So it's fun to get paid to do what you're passionate about. With me today, Arneh, you want to introduce yourself?
Yep, sure. Hey everyone, my name is Arneh Eskandari, and I've been with Redgate for just about 7 years now as a sales engineer. So I work very closely with our sales team here, and as part of my role, I've helped hundreds of our existing and new customers adopt DevOps on the database side of things. So if you guys have any questions, here's my contact details. Would be more than happy to help.
Cool beans. All right, so here's the agenda. We're going to talk about a few things, and then we're going to do a little demo. But again, I'm passionate about DevOps. I'm going to be spending a bunch of time talking about it. A few notes. You guys are on mute, so if you're yelling, we can't hear you. If you have questions, there is a questions window. So you type it in. Someone's saying there should be audio. Arneh, I can hear you. Can you hear me? And I know Bill heard us earlier.
Yeah,
so
I
I
can.
suspect,
Yeah.
Daniel, the problem might be on your end. There should be audio. Anyway, that's cool. So there is a questions window, and I do look at the questions window. So if you've got questions, go ahead and type them into the questions window, and we will do our best to answer them. Let's see. This will be recorded. We already answered that question earlier, but we'll go ahead and say it again. This will be recorded. It will get posted out to YouTube and to a webinars page on the redgate.com website. So you should be able to track this down later if you want to take a look at it again. Let's see, I think that's it. Questions and videos and recordings. Cool. So who are we? We are Redgate. Redgate is a pretty large scale company. We've got tools across 91% of the Fortune 100. You can see some of them there. Heck, I worked for one of those companies. I won't say which one. Our philosophy is to design usable, highly usable, reliable tools that solve problems. I mean, that's really what it's about. It's trying to figure out what's going wrong. What can we do to help, right? A couple of other ways that we help is we have Simple Talk and SQL Server Central, which are two places where you can go to get fantastic information and a lot of assistance. And we've already got a poll up on the screen. If you guys can take a look at it, it's which Redgate tools do you have, if any? We're curious. And while you're answering that poll, I'll just talk a couple of minutes more about Redgate. Another 20 minutes should do it. Kidding. We do sponsor a lot of community events. We take part in the PASS organization, where we sponsor the PASS Summit and a bunch of other things. We sponsor SQL Saturday. We also sponsor a lot of user groups, meetups, and other events. So you will see us out there on the road. Swing by, say hi. Even if you don't want to talk to us about our tools, just say hello. Let us know that you heard about us from this webinar. It'd be useful. But other than that, just track me down, say hello when I'm at an event. I live off talking to people. It's how I get most of my questions for my blogs. Is sitting down and talking to people and seeing what they're doing and what kind of problems they're having at their work. So I want to hear. How are we doing on the polls?
Great. So as you can see, well, surprisingly, SQL Compare and Data Compare are not, the second one here. They're normally the top one.
Yeah.
But yeah, which is interesting. But yeah, fairly common. We have a lot of our people who know Redgate obviously are familiar with SQL Compare, Data Compare, our SQL Prompt tool, and SQL Monitor. So this is great.
Great. Cool. All right, so let's keep going then. Let's talk about DevOps. I mean, the thing is that DevOps is all by itself is a challenge, right? The basic concept of combining development and operations so that development is moving things into operations in a way that supports the operations team, that operations is working with the development team and moving stuff down towards, or out, or however you want to think about it, around to the development side of things, so that they're assisting in ensuring that the development is working and testing inside of an environment that more accurately simulates production. This concept of merging groups that traditionally were, almost, at war at times, is difficult, right? I mean, add on top of that the fact that data is involved, because data is a unique critter. It's not that we're special, although we are. Data professionals are special, but that's not the real thing. The real thing is that data itself is tricky, because unlike code, we can't just throw out the old data and put new data in. When we do, oops, should probably turn that off. When we do data, the data has to be preserved. It cannot go away. So even though you're doing migrations, and even though you're doing deployments, and even though you're moving out new functionality, modifying functionality, you cannot simply nuke the data. You must maintain that data over time, and it makes DevOps more difficult. The fact that you cannot simply just chuck it and put the new one in place really impacts what you can do with DevOps and how you can do DevOps. There's literally no other way to put it. The data makes this harder. So what happens? Well, we get into a lot of situations where, I should turn that off. Hang on. Give me 1 second, Arneh. I'm sorry.
Sure, no problem.
Just let me kill Slack here real quick. Nobody wants to see my discussions about my book that I'm editing. Okay, cool. A lot of problems come up when we're talking about database deployments, because traditionally, and I would say most people still, are not deploying databases the way they deploy code. They're not deploying databases with their code. It's a separate thing. That it is not an integrated process. And so what do you run into? Well, I mean, the most obvious is literally the databases are not matching the application. So the app thinks things look one way, the database thinks it looks another, and then you hit all kinds of issues. It does go back to that classic, developer, it works on my machine kind of thing, but that's a question of process, not some sort of shortcoming. Of course, you're going to develop initially locally, but then you've got to be able to validate that. And that's something that DevOps is going to help us get to. Further, we don't have traceability on the database. I very recently, this morning, oh my gosh, it was this morning, I very recently hit a question on the MSDN forums, and they were saying, look, I've set up this ready roll project, and I'm ready to deploy things, but I can't tell you, when things are changing and when they're not. I can't tell what's happened. And sure enough, they had not hooked their ready roll into their team services. They didn't have it on GitHub or anything else. And so they literally didn't know what kind of changes they were doing, even though they were already starting to, going into the whole database automation thing. Now let's say that you're not even trying to automate your database deployments. You're not even starting from projects within Visual Studio. It's even harder to know what changes you've made. Sure, you can look at backups and stuff, but that's still not going to tell you over time what sort of changes have been made to your database from various sources. You also get the issues that people don't know how to roll back, mainly because, again, they don't know what to roll back to. What became, what was changed, what got changed last time, what got changed the time before that, what got changed 4 times back, and can we then get 4 times back with the database structures in order to do other kinds of testing, other kinds of validation? And most of the time we cannot, because of data primarily, but also because we are not adapting the processes. We become a bottleneck in the agile delivery process. That becomes a huge issue. That's when developers start to bypass the database team, and you find all kinds of other problems come up. Also, because we are so resistant to change, that a lot of very traditional DBAs are resistant to change, but even some of the non-traditional DBAs kind of like it, well, hang on, if it's working, don't touch it. Well, we'll do less frequent deployments. Well, if we're doing less frequent deployments, that means we're doing bigger deployments. And bigger deployments means more things that can go wrong. And also it means that you're not practicing your deployments. If you're not doing lots and lots and lots of deployments, then deployments is this rare, odd thing that, maybe we've got a checklist and maybe it's been validated, but maybe it hasn't. And so we can run into all kinds of issues. Also, you see lots and lots of people with manual processes. As soon as you start hitting too much manual processing, it's going to slow down everything. Further, the more manual processing you do, you get somebody like me involved. I'm a decent coder, not the greatest, but I can get the job done. I'm decent at getting automation put together. Maybe not the greatest, but I get the job done. But you want me to do manual processes and you think I'm going to get it right every time? You're wrong. I will screw it up the first time you let me run it. And the last thing you want me to do is run something for the very first time in a production environment, because I'm very likely to break it. Now, most of you are probably not as dangerous as I am, but human beings being human beings, you're still likely to make mistakes. And so manual processes prevent us from being consistent and accurate, and manual processes prevent us from automating everything so that we can eliminate the humans from the bad parts and just focus us on the good parts, which is, the actual thought and process and how to get things done, rather than simply the doing of it. The doing of it is something we need to automate the heck out of. And then finally, it just takes a lot of time to get deployments done. Now, a long time ago, I was doing deployments, and it'd take us 3 or 4 hours to get them done sometimes, including all kinds of backups and stuff. And we would actually go to the pub during the deployment process, and it was a lot of fun. When we finally automated everything, we actually eliminated the pub visit, which was kind of depressing, but ultimately we were more accurate and able to do a lot more deployments faster. So while I do adhere to the pub visit as part of my job, it's actually kind of nice to make it go away, so I'm not spending more and more hours at work. And so all of these things are caused by poor database deployment and or no automation around database deployment at all. Let's see. Come on. Now, if we start to integrate DevOps, if we start to integrate the idea of look, how are developers doing these deployments? How do they automate things? What is continuous integration? Can I use it? What is continuous delivery? Can I use it? Identifying these things and beginning to bring those processes into what you do inside your database adds a whole bunch of benefits. I think one of the biggest ones is the predictability of the release, is the fact that you know what you're deploying. Not only do you know what you're deploying, but you've practiced the deployment multiple times, so you know how it's going to behave. All of those things make it a big deal. And like I said, the elimination of the repetition, the elimination of the manual activities, getting me out of the way so I don't have a chance to screw things up. Can I screw up the automation? Yes, but we test that, validate it, and then we fix it at the automation level before we get anywhere near our production server. So all of this acts as a safety valve to ensure that the production server is better protected, not worse. Also, once we start to do these things, once we start to automate these things, once we can validate that our process, this is all about trusting the process. Once we validate that our process works, we can start to move quicker. We can deploy faster, we can deploy more often, we can deploy smaller sets of changes more frequently, and all of this adds a greater degree of reliability, and most of all, a greater degree of safety. I mean, think about it like, testing your backups. I mean, everyone runs backup scripts, but does everyone test your backups? Well, this is an additional thing. Everyone deploys changes, right? Everyone does, but do you test that deployment before you get to production? Do you validate that your deployments are going to work? Do you have a high degree of reliability going into the deployment, not afterwards, not during, going in? Have you got a high degree of confidence that what you're going to do is going to work because you've got a process in place that supports it? And if not, that's what we're talking about doing, is getting the benefit of DevOps by approaching that kind of thing. Now, we did a very thorough report, right? It's based on a whole bunch of research, a large number of respondents, and the fact is 80% of companies, more than 80% of companies, are looking to adopt DevOps. Even though some of them are not calling it DevOps, they are looking at automating deployments, automating continuous integration, continuous delivery, and effectively they're creating what is DevOps inside their system. They just sometimes call it something else. And the big driver to that, one of the big drivers to that, is the database, is the need to be able to make database changes in the same way that you make code changes, with the same degree of speed, with the same degree of reliability. And so you have to do that. And also 76% of the people are saying that, hey, guess what? Developers go across apps and databases. So they're already working in a DevOps style environment. And you guys can follow the link there and get the full report. Believe me, it's absolutely worth a read to understand what's going on with DevOps. And so the bottom line, now the reports found that basically the core concepts of version control, of continuous delivery, actually correlated very directly to IT performance. Better performing shops are doing these things. And as we all know, if someone's doing well, you want to emulate them, right? I mean, that's just kind of how it works. Most high-performing IT organizations were more agile and more reliable, deploying 46 times more frequently. I find that insane, that they were 46 times more frequently, yet 96 times, but a lower failure rate. 96 times the recovery time from failures, and 5 times lower change rate. Why? Because they're practicing their deployments. I mean, it's just down to that. I mean, if you do deployments 20, 50 times a day, you're not scared of deployments anymore, right? So, I mean, it's really what it comes down to. And they also found that IT organizations were twice as likely to exceed profitability, market share, and productivity goals. In short, high-performing IT organizations work for, help create high-performing companies. Holy crud, let's get that done too, right? I love my job, I like my paycheck, let's chase that down. So the whole concept of DevOps, the whole concept of automating your processes, defining your processes and automating your processes does have results, and it is something that the best companies are already on top of. So here's the question. How can Redgate help, right? I mean, this is largely about process, right? The process is the hard part. The most difficult aspect is the process. But once you've defined the process, that's where tooling comes in, and we're here to pitch in. So if you look at it, we've got tools across both the dev and the operations side of things, although I don't like to call them sides anymore. I very much believe this concept that we collectively in IT are responsible for everything. I have a responsibility in development. I have a responsibility in operations. My developer friends have a responsibility in development. They have a responsibility in operations. There's not this hard borderline anymore. So how can Redgate do it? Well, first off, starting with source control. We can help you out there. We've got stuff going on that checks you in and out of source control. ReadyRoll works directly inside of Visual Studio, but you can also use SQL Prompt and SQL Test along with your Visual Studio development to make your development easier and more accurate. And then you go through release management using SQL Monitor, DLM dashboard, and SQL backup once you've gotten stuff into production. And all of it's driven through ReadyRoll, which is our integrated into Visual Studio, free, by the way, tool, although there is a pay version that gives you some more functionality. But there is free with Visual Studio Enterprise version of ReadyRoll, so you guys can start doing full-on, full-blown automated deployments today. No reason why you can't get it going. But step one, you're going to work with source control. Oh, questions already come up. We're already using Octopus. Where does this fit into this? Well, Octopus is basically a release management software and or your continuous integration software. And where we fit in is we are helping that piece of the software work directly with the database. Our role is to work within that CI/CD process to generate changes and get them out the door. Matter of fact, I'm positive, although you're not using Octopus today, are you, Arneh?
I am, yeah. So
oh, you
yeah,
are using
Mark,
Octopus today. Okay,
you,
cool.
Yeah.
I shouldn't be answering your question. Arneh's going to answer your question in about 30 seconds. But basically, the whole idea here is that we've got the tools to get your code in and out of source control. We've got the code then to use source control for your database deployments so that you can automate those deployments through your CI/CD process, through your release management tools such as Octopus, and then get it all out to your production servers, either in a continuous delivery or in a continuous release process. Either way, we're here to help you get those through, and then once they're there, monitor the changes and keep track of them. Now, I'm going to turn this over to Arneh, and he's going to start answering questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Grant. So let
Sure.
me go ahead and share my screen here. All right. Okay, so you should be able to see my screen.
I see it. You're up. Yep, you're good.
Okay, perfect. Excellent. So, so what we're going to do now as part of this demo is walk through that end-to-end process that you just saw as part of the diagram. So we'll start out by showing how we can help you with your development processes, how we can help you with source control, and then from there we'll look into build automation, automated validation of your changes, as well as automated delivery of your changes to your hiring environments. So as you saw from that diagram, we plug into different frameworks. So we plug into different source control systems, whether it's TFS, Git, Subversion, Mercurial, Perforce, whatever it is. And we also plug into different CI and CD tools. So Grant just mentioned Octopus Deploy as a release management tool. You have Jenkins, TeamCity, Bamboo, all these great tools out there that can help you with orchestrating your continuous integration and continuous delivery process. So what we do as Redgate is that we provide you with the tasks and the processes that you can build into your CI and CD process specifically for your databases, so you can streamline your whole delivery pipeline, across both your application code and your databases. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get started here. So just to give you an idea of my environment and which databases we're going to be working with. So here I have a couple of databases that represent my development and my hiring environments. So I have this dev database here. This our GitHub Wide Word Importers database. This is my development database. This is the database that I'll be working off of as part of my development process. And I also have a couple of databases here, as you can see, testing, staging, production, that represent my higher environment. So these are all running on the same server. That's why I have them with different names. So what we're going to start off with is talk a bit about how we can help you improve your development processes. As Grant mentioned, building the right process is very important, and it's really the fundamental piece to a successful DevOps process. And source control plays a really big role in that whole process. I think Grant hit on a really good point as far as a lot of shops not utilizing the best practices that they already are utilizing on their application code side of things. So it's just a matter of bringing those best practices and utilize them on the database side of things and treat your database just like code. So what I have here is, as you can see, I'm working in Visual Studio. So our Ready Roll component is a Visual Studio project. So what we'll be doing is we'll be working against our dev database and then use our Visual Studio project to help us track our changes, commit our changes into source control, and kind of go from there. Obviously, one of the main challenges with traditional database development is that there are a lot of manual processes involved. So as developers, we are responsible for keeping track of our change scripts, ordering them, naming them, and then kind of figure out how those scripts merge with other developers' scripts, and then sort of ship those across or over the wall to the DBA so they can execute them against our target environment. So there's definitely things you can do to improve that process, and I'll show you how that can be done using Ready Roll. So here's my Ready Roll project in Visual Studio. So we have migrations, which is basically our change scripts that we execute and store in source control. And we also have a couple of other folders such as pre and post deployments, programmable objects, and schema models that I'm going to talk about in more details in a little bit. So the idea here is that you make your changes against your dev database, and then you get this tool, this project, to automatically bring in your change scripts into a project, put them in order, and save them off so you don't have to do anything manually there. So as you can see here, my project is currently linked to my dev database here, as it shows. And currently everything is identical, but let's just go ahead and refresh just to make sure that there's no changes pending to be imported into our project here. Okay, so there's no pending changes. So I'm going to go ahead and start making a couple of changes here. So I'm going to make some schema changes to start with. So let's go ahead and modify one of our existing objects. All right, so let's start off by modifying a store procedure. Another great tool from Redgate that a lot of you are probably already familiar with is SQL Prompt, which works in both Visual Studio and SSMS. So SQL Prompt has a lot of great features such as auto-completion, IntelliSense, formatting, static code analysis, which is something that we recently added to the tool, and it got us very excited about this tool. As you can see here, for instance, looking at our alter script, there are some lines with the squiggly lines underneath. So this is basically our static code analysis working in the background in SQL Prompt to let us know if there is any sort of bad practices or any areas within our script or code that can be improved. So for instance, here you can see it's saying that asterisk in a select list, which is a bad practice, and it's definitely not recommended. So SQL Prompt can definitely help you with that as well. There is a lot of code analysis rules already built in, so you can go ahead and take a look at those and see which ones you care about and which ones you may not need as part of your development process. Obviously, the whole idea of DevOps is that your changes are always production ready. Building something that works is a lot different than building something that is production ready. When we talk about databases, obviously performance is very important, and that's something that DBAs care about a lot. So one of the main reasons why there's always this wall between, or gate between development and the operations team is performance is one of those factors. So DBAs want to make sure that whatever script is going to get executed against production is not going to impact performance. So some of these code analysis tools can actually help your developers see those areas that they can improve on, and change them as part of their development process. So it's all about shifting left. It's all about making sure that your whole development and operations team have a common goal of delivering value to your end users or to your customers, or whoever it is that you're delivering a product to. So in this case, since that's a bad practice, I'm going to go ahead and replace the star with some columns. So again, SQL prompt makes that really easy for me. As you can see, it pulls the columns from our table, or tables if there's a join statement there. So I'm going to go ahead and select some of the columns here that I'm interested in. And you can also format your code. So if I go to SQL prompt and say format SQL, that will format my code as well. And let's go ahead and execute our change. I'm also going to go ahead and make another quick change here to, let's modify a table, for example. So it doesn't matter how you make your changes, whether, for example, with table changes, if you're doing it through the designer, or if you prefer writing SQL, either way works perfectly fine with our tools. We can go ahead and import those changes regardless of how they were made against your development database. So I'm just going to go ahead and add a new column to this salespeople table. Obviously, you don't want to have salespeople without quotas, so I'm going to add a All right, so made a couple of changes here against our development database. If I go ahead and refresh my project here, this should tell me, show me the pending changes that have been made against our database that we now need to import into our project. So as you can see, our store procedure and the table that I modified, and we can see obviously the object differences here. So we went from select star to select these columns, and on our table, we added a new column for quota. So now there are a lot of tools out there for managing database changes, and with a lot of them, data is always a second-class citizen. So if you want to modify, for example, data in your lookup tables or do any type of data migrations, you kind of have to always figure out a workaround to do this. With Redroll, you don't have to, because we've made that really easy for you to make data changes, whether it's to lookup tables or even do data migrations as part of your schema changes. So in this case, I have some lookup tables that I care about in terms of data. So if we take a look at a list of my tables, you can see I have this table called customer address type, which is currently in bold. This means that the data from this table is being tracked. So if any data changes I make to this table, those will be tracked by the project, and I can actually generate a change script for that and promote those data changes alongside our schema changes to our target environment as part of the same process. So I'm going to go ahead and quickly make a data change to that table as well. So if we take a look at our address type here, so I'm just going to add, let's take a look at the data real quick, make sure. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove one of these address types. So the secondary is no longer being used in our application, so we don't need that anymore. So I'm going to go ahead and just delete that. All right, so let's do a new query. And as you can see, SQL prompt makes it really easy for you to write your SQL as well. All right, so let's go ahead and refresh our view here once more. So now we should have 3 changes that we need to, oh, let's check. Some reason, didn't like that change. Oh, I think it's because of the build that was running in the background. So let's try that once more. Here we go. Okay, great. So we've got our changes. So as you can see, we have our data change, and because we deleted a record from a table, it's actually giving us a warning that this could result into data loss. You will get similar warning if you're dropping columns, tables, or any changes that could risk your data in your production environment. So I'm happy with all of these changes. So I'm just going to go ahead and say import and generate script. And here Ready-Roll is actually utilizing our compare engine in the background to generate those change scripts for us. So as you can see here, we have a new migration script now added to our project. It took care of the naming for us, the ordering, and if you take a look at that script here, we can see what it's doing. So it's altering the table to add that column that we added, and it's also deleting the record from our address type that we just deleted as part of that. One thing you notice here is that our store procedure is not in this script. That's because you can actually get your store procedures to follow a more of a state-based model as opposed to migrations. So that's where our programmable objects feature comes into Ready-Roll, where you can easily just simply drop and recreate the store procedures or the programmable objects that have been modified. That obviously includes functions, views, as well as store procedures. So if I take a look at my store procedures here, you can see that the store procedure file for that store procedure that I modified has been updated to include the columns instead of select star from. And all this is going to do in our target environments is that if the object exists, it will drop and recreate it. So this basically will help you save a lot of migration scripts. So your migration scripts essentially are only for table and data changes, and program objects, you don't need migration scripts. So that should help make your projects more manageable and not have to deal with hundreds or even thousands of migration scripts if you're doing a lot of store procedure or program object changes. So everything looks good here. So I'm going to go ahead and refresh my project and commit the pending changes into source control. So let's go ahead and commit into source control. So I'm using Git through GitHub as my source control system. So made some schema and data changes. And let's commit and push to our GitHub repository. So obviously one thing that, again, makes database development and deployment challenging is the state that we need to preserve and execute our scripts in order to transform the state of our database from previous state to the current state. Whereas with application code, all you're doing is just replacing existing code. So that obviously makes deployment or delivery of database changes more difficult in comparison to application code. So, for example, one example is conflicts in source control. Like when you have developers making changes to tables and they have migration scripts associated with those changes, how do you actually catch those conflicts? Because the migration scripts aren't, they're 2 different files that could be touching the same object. So what we do additionally there to help you with conflict resolution is keeping track of the schema model of your table. So even though we're doing migration scripts for your tables, we still keep track of how your tables change. So if 2 developers touch the same table, you will see a conflict on the actual schema model of the table in source control, as opposed to the migration script. So that way you can go back and see where the conflict was and if they can be merged, or if you would need to take one or the other. So for example, here with the schema model, you can see it's got the new column that we added as a result of that migration script. Sorry, go ahead, Grant.
No, it's okay. It's actually roughly related to what you're talking about right now. The question came up,
Perfect.
and I think the answer is yes, but I want to find out if you know for sure. And that's whether or not we work with database synonyms. With
We do,
synonym,
yeah. So
yeah, I just haven't tested it, so I didn't want to say for
yeah,
sure. But okay, cool, good. That's what I wanted to hear. Thank you.
exactly. Yeah. So I know that's something that is, you know, is one of the shortfalls of, for example, SSDT or database projects in Visual Studio. But yeah, we do work with synonyms, and we do keep track of synonyms as well. Yeah. Okay, great. So we committed our changes into source control, so that went ahead and updated our GitHub repository here. So if I go to GitHub real quick, and if you take a look at our commits, here's our commit. So we can see exactly what's been updated or what has changed. So we have a new migration script again. Here's the script that is going to run. One thing that I forgot to mention is that when these scripts get generated, obviously as a developer, you have full control over the script. So if you want to make any modifications, you can just do it inside Visual Studio before you save this off to your project. So for instance, with this alter table where I added a column, I could, if I wanted to, I could go in and add an update script right after that to populate that column with some default data, which is totally fine. So you can put in your data migration scripts or whatever changes that you want to make to those scripts that are generated by SQL Compare as part of your development process. So again, we're shifting things that for you, those of you who are familiar with SQL Compare, you know that, you know, when it comes to deployments, the scripts are generated on the fly, and then at that point you have to quickly look at the script and make sure that you know, there's no changes that you want to make to the script. So in this case, we shift it left so developers can actually make those modifications early in the process before you're even ready to deploy to any of your higher environments. So what this should have done is trigger a build in my CI environment. So as I mentioned, I'm using Jenkins as my CI system. And here's my CI project. So the nice thing about Redgate is that setting up your build and release process is actually fairly straightforward. So on the build side of things, we're simply using MS Build. So you can actually, if you're working with .NET, you can actually build your application code and the database together as part of the same MS Build task or job. So in this case, what I'm doing in my build is that I'm, again, as you can see, using MS Build to build our database. So we have this shadow database, which kind of does the build validation. It validates all of our changes, our migration scripts against the shadow database, also known as a build database that you would use just for verification and validation purposes. If that part is successful, then we can even generate a report of what your deployment would look like going to a target environment. So here in this case, I've set my target database as my prod database, so we can actually generate a report of what objects will be deployed and how if we were to deploy from this build. So again, you know, shifting left, you know, you want to see these reports early in the process as part of your build before you're even ready to deploy to production. And because I'm using Octopus Deploy, we're using some of the parameters and arguments for Octopus to version our packages, specify the URL for Octopus Deploy and our NuGet feed that we're going to push our NuGet package to. Again, Redgate has out-of-box support for that. So in your Redgate project, you can actually set up a property to create your NuGet package out of box. So here you can see we have Octopus compatible NuGet package. You check that, and it will create your package for you as part of your build process. So there's nothing extra that you need to do to get up and running with this tool and Octopus Deploy. So now let's take a look at our build and our artifacts. So when I committed a change into source control, that should have triggered a build. So let's just quickly see our build here. Okay, so yeah, as you can see, our build number 34 was successful. And as part of that, we went ahead and created these artifacts here. So within these artifacts, we have a couple of a PowerShell script and a .SQL package file that are required for your deployments. So these two is what we use to determine what needs to be deployed to any of your hiring environments, and we put together a SQL script using SQL CMD that will then execute against your target environments. On top of that, we generate, a diff report against that target database that you set. So if I quickly show you, let's just download those so we can actually open up the HTML file. So as you can see here, we generate a report against that target database that you set. So the target database, again, is just for reporting purposes. You don't have to deploy to that environment as part of your build process. We're just generating a report to tell us exactly how this will impact our production environment when it comes to deployments. So we can see exactly what objects have been modified. Again, this is something that you always, doesn't exist in traditional database development and migrations approaches. You always have a set of migration scripts that you always send over without having a clear picture of what objects are being impacted and how, and what their previous state was and what their current state is as a result of your deployment. So with this report, we give you more visibility into exactly what your deployment will do to your target environment. So we can see we added a new column here to this table, and if you take a look at the store procedure, we replace the select start with these columns. If there's any risks of losing data, again, you will see warnings here. And finally, the deployment script that we put together, again, using SQL CMD. So the deployment is broken down into your pre-deployment scripts, which in this case we have one. So if the database doesn't exist, it will create it. And then your incremental changes or your migrations, which is basically determined by the tool. So it uses a table in your target environments to keep track of which migration scripts have been deployed and which migration scripts are pending. So that way it puts together the right scripts to execute against your target environments. And this is specifically helpful, especially if your environments are in different states, like, staging is behind testing and testing is behind development and so on. Using that table, we can figure out exactly which migration scripts are pending for that specific environment that you're deploying to. So based on that, it figured that there are a couple of migration scripts that are pending. So the first one is the alter table to add the column and the data that we modified. And then the next one is the programmable object, which is that store procedure that we modified. So it simply will drop and recreate that as part of the process. And finally, our post-deployment scripts to finalize the deployment. So everything looks good. So we looked at our report, we looked at our script, everything looks good. So I'm actually ready to go ahead and promote these changes up the chain to our hiring environments. So I'm going to switch to Redgate, which is the tool that I'm using. Again, you don't have to use, switch to Octopus Deploy. So you don't have to use Octopus Deploy if you don't want to. We have customers who use Jenkins pipeline, for example, to orchestrate their releases. Or if you're a TFS shop, you can just use TFS end-to-end for your builds, releases, and source control. So you have total freedom as far as what tools you want to use for automation. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new release off of that new package that we just created from build number 34 in Jenkins. So I'm going to go ahead and save this and start my deployment process to our testing environment. So we're not doing any sort of comparison to generate a script at this point. And what that means is that your deployments will be very fast. As you can see, it already completed doing the deployment. And as part of our log, we can see exactly, again, what changes it's made to our database and what program objects and what tables and data has been modified or it modified as part of our deployment. So the deployment to our testing environment was successful. So I can go ahead and easily promote that to our staging environment. For those of you who are using Octopus Deploy, we have a step template that you can actually download that makes your deployment, setting up your deployments really straightforward and easy. So if you take a look at my process here, we have this template called Redgate Deploy Database Package. And all you need to do as part of this template is to define which packages it is that you want to deploy from and what your target server and database is that you are deploying to, and whether or not you want to use Windows authentication or SQL Server authentication. That's all you need to configure for your deployments. And again, the tool will be utilizing those build artifacts that we created, including that PowerShell script that you saw in our artifacts, to basically put together our deployment scripts and execute it against that specific target environment that you're deploying to. So yeah, so if you go back to our dashboard, we can see release 004 got deployed to our staging successfully too, and I can go ahead and promote this all the way to production. Again, as you can see here, I haven't configured everything to deploy all the way to production automatically. So one thing that I hear from a lot of customers is that they always think that DevOps is about automating everything end to end and not having any control over the process or review in place, which a lot of DBAs find it risky. So it's not about that. It's about building a process, building a pipeline that goes through a set of tasks automatically when you press a button. So you don't have to automate the whole thing end to end, but what's really important is that you set up that process, you orchestrate your process, so when it comes to deployments, you don't have a bunch of people following a set of manual steps to package up their deployments and then deliver those packages and execute them against their target environment. So that's that was the end-to-end process that I had prepared for you guys. We still have a few minutes here, so I'd like to open up to questions. I can see that Grant helped us with a lot of them. But
yeah,
Grant, are there any questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I got two. One, you said that when talking about synonyms, you said that they were there was a shortfall of some kind. Did somebody mishear? Did you misstate, or did you have something in mind?
Yeah, generally, so with one thing that I've heard from people who use the default database projects in Visual Studio, so SSDT, or SQL Server data tools, is that yeah, so working with synonyms in SSDT is not as easy as it is with Redgate. So that's what I was referring to.
Oh, okay. I misunderstood, and I guess they did too. Okay, cool.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No. That was great. Good to know. And then my favorite question, and I'm going to let you answer it. How does Redgate work with databases that are replicated?
So with databases that are replicated, obviously, depending on if you're making modifications to the tables that are being replicated, then that means you have to do a couple of things to take care of that, right? So if you can, disable replication and re-enable it again as part of your deployment process, then you can obviously orchestrate that as part of your delivery process. If you can't, then there's a couple of things you can do with our tool in terms of setting up the isolation level for your transaction. So by default, Redgate does your deployment in a single transaction as serializable, but which can cause a conflict with a replication process. So what you can do is that you can drop the level of the transaction isolation level, so that way it doesn't conflict with replication. So those are a couple of things. We actually do have a really good article on how to do database deployment automation with replication. So we'll be more than happy to share that with you guys as well. Did you have anything else to add to that, Grant, as far as what you experienced with replication or anything?
No, I mean, my experience with replication is a giant pain in the bottom, and nothing makes replication easier. So
exactly. Yep.
It's just I dread those questions, frankly, because there's never an easy answer to it. It basically requires you to tear down and rebuild, or do a lot of work in and around your processing. It's just Sorry.
Agreed. Yeah.
There's another another question that came up is, and it's come up twice now in two different forms, and they were, I want to use SQL source control alongside ReadyRoll to deploy from the same source control repository.
Yep. So so the tools are that you can't use the tools together as part of a single process. So SQL source control is more geared towards shops that aren't .NET or not work in Visual Studio. So for folks who prefer to work in SSMS, for example, SQL source control is basically what would plugs into SSMS for those of you who are not familiar with SQL source control. So it kind of acts as a bridge between your development environment and your existing source control system. And then that relies on our SQL Compare engine later to do the build and deployments through our VLM automation components that also comes as part of the SQL Toolbelt. I've seen customers sort of build a process where the developers are using SQL source control to commit their changes into a development repository that is purely used for just tracking changes. And then when they apply their changes to a integration environment or development environment, their DBA sort of pick those and import them into a ReadyRoll project, and then kind of follow a migrations approach from there to their deployments. Again, it's not a common process. I've seen it in a couple of cases with working with customers, but generally these aren't tools that you can use concurrently or as part of the same project.
Right.
So it's one or the other.
I can't announce anything. That there may be changes to that in the future, and that's all I can say.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I was going to mention that as well. We are looking into kind of creating a better integration in terms of the source control structure of both SQL source control and ReadyRoll. So regardless of which project you're using, if you point them to your source control repository, it should be able to identify your source control repository and be able to build and deploy from there. So that's something that is in the works, and it's something that we're also pretty excited about too.
Right. And so to answer your question, let's see, Ken, currently working in source control and SQL Compare to generate SQL packages. Should you go to ReadyRoll to replace what you're doing? No, don't change anything right now. Stay where you're at. Am I recommending you go to Visual Studio instead of Management Studio, Steve? I'm going to just use the single word no, but I could use two words, but I won't. No, we're not recommending that you switch over. I'm saying that we are going to make some changes in how some things are done. You don't need to change what you're doing.
Exactly.
We
are building a plugin for SSMS.
Automation for replicated databases. Yeah. I can't spend a lot of time on it. No, I'm sorry, because it basically, replication is a very difficult thing to deploy against, period, full stop. We don't have a magic solution that makes it easy. It is extremely hard. You have to either work around the replication or work with replication itself, and those processes are something that you have to build manually. We do not have a tool that makes the replication easy. So that's just not something we have.
Again, it depends on whether or not you're deploying to tables that are being replicated. So if you're not applying changes to tables that are being replicated, then that should be fairly straightforward. All you might need to do is just to drop down that transaction isolation level that I mentioned to make it work with the replication. But but if you're making changes to tables that are being replicated on pretty frequent basis, then there's some things that you might need to do additionally to take care of that.
Right. And then the next question was, in your example, you made changes scripting from a dev database rather than working directly with source control objects. Can that work if you have multiple dev environments?
Yeah. So so you can, I guess, work off of the SQL project. That's actually something that our team is currently looking into, as far as improving the offline development process. So if developers don't want to make changes directly to a database, that's something that we're working on, and
although
what we can do there.
Well, I mean, we do support. I mean, there's all kinds of ways to do a local database, and we support every one of them I can think of, contain databases and all that fun stuff. So I mean, you can develop locally, every individual developer locally, and you're all going through a common source control system. So you're checking stuff in and out of source control. If I make changes and you need my changes, it's not any different from the way you're doing app code right now. If I make changes and you need those changes, you're going to go to the source control system and get them. The database stuff works the same way. It's the whole idea of using source control is so that we can do multiple deployments and multiple developments at the same time without me stepping on you until you're ready to see the stuff that I've made changes to. So yeah, absolutely, you can have multiple development environments. You can also do it with a shared environment. I just don't recommend it. It creates all kinds of problems. I recommend everybody's got their own local copy of stuff is the easiest way to get it done. How does that work with ReadyRoll?
Exactly.
It basically just what he did. You're checking stuff in and out of source control, and the builds are done locally by the ReadyRoll process. So if you need to capture, if I've added a table and you need to capture that, you go check out the source control, and it will move that down to your local database. That's just how it works.
So yeah, so you just rebuild. Basically, every time you get a latest from source control, you can build that solution on your local, and what that can do is to apply those new changes to your local development database. And as Grant mentioned, it's really important to do that, because if you have developers working on a shared database, that means everyone can see each other's changes. So if you're building working on an object that is dependent on another change, you can easily do that on a shared development database without having to worry about, I need to, that person needs to check into source control first before I can get it, and then I apply my changes on top of that. That's basically the best practice, because that's the only way that you can make sure that your changes are in the right order as far as your migration scripts and everything else. If everyone's working on a shared database, then that can introduce some issues and some challenges as far as managing your migrations, ordering of changes, and figuring out which change was whose and importing them and all of that.
Well, yeah, but even worse than all that, I mean, and all that's difficult, but even worse than that is that in a shared environment, I can break your code, right? And
exactly.
It's like I've taken you offline for some period of time. That's horrible, right? You don't want to go down that road. Arneh, what is our support for SQL CLR?
So as far as I know, you can you can actually bring in your assemblies into your project and the SQL CLR objects.
It's not one I've tested, so I just don't want to.
Yeah, it's not.
I hate. I mean, if I haven't built it myself, I hate saying stuff. I've got a great degree of confidence in the things I've done, but if I've just read about it, then I've just read about it, so I don't have a great degree of confidence. I'm sorry, John.
As far as the question on,
for you.
Yeah, as far as if we're referencing SSDT SQL CLR projects in ReadyRoll, I think we are. I mean, we are using the SSDT framework in the background, so that probably means that we are using those SQL CLR projects in ReadyRoll as well.
In case people can't see it, I'm going to copy and paste this into an answer.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie.
Thanks, Stephanie. I did not know that.
Perfect.
So, like I say, I will gleefully say I don't know if I don't know. Much better that than tell people stuff that's bad or wrong. Okay, cool. All right, I think we're just slightly over time. And that looks like that's all the questions.
Things.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead and run through it. I did forget to do the polls.
Yeah, that's fine. So
I was so busy answering the questions.
I wanted to. Yeah, exactly. So a couple of things I wanted to also add. So on our website, we do have the assessment that you can take to kind of assess where you're at as far as your maturity when it comes to database DevOps, and it has some guidelines as far as how you compare to the others who are doing DevOps and all of that. So I would highly recommend you guys to just check this out. And then it's a fairly straightforward. It shouldn't take too much time to complete the assessment, and that will give you a good idea of where you're at and where you need to go. Additionally, we are doing another webinar on February 1st on how to implement DevOps at scale. So how do you roll this out, across different teams within your organization? So that's a really good one that I would highly recommend you guys to keep a note of and also join. And finally, again, if you guys need any help, you have our contact details, but you can also reach out to us on databasedevops@red-gate.com. And if you have questions around our processes or our tools or anything else that we can help you with, feel free to reach out. And that's all from me.
Great. Well, that's all I've got. And
perfect.
Thanks a lot. Thanks everybody for coming out. Appreciate your time. Hopefully it was helpful.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Yeah, have a good rest of the day.
You too.
Thank you, Grant, for your help. Take care.
Oh, no, thank you. You did all the work.
You're welcome. Take care. Bye.